And right now with us to talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina as well as Serbia, we have our guest, Spasimir Domaradzki from University of Warsaw. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening.
Let's start first with the meeting between President Macron and President Vučić. They're apparently meeting right now. We're not quite sure of any new announcements, but one of the main things that was already in the press before was very much the idea of special purpose industry talks. So in translation, that's defense. We're looking very much at Serbia, looking at French planes, these Rafale fighter jets, to replace their aging MiG-29s. So is this a way now to get Serbia closer to the European fold?
This is always a tool to get closer, but we need to be aware that this is, in a sense, the Serbian approach today to look for small hooks that can be used in order to establish closer relations with various partners. And we need to be aware that although indeed it can be considered as an enthusiastic perspective, it will first and foremost contribute to the French military industry, if that turns out to be true. Secondly, we need to be aware that Serbia invests a lot in military equipment from Russia, and in that sense, the sole jet fighters will not make a huge difference. And we also need to be aware that this Serbian step seems to be logical, having in mind that also its neighbors are modernizing their military equipment, and in that sense there is a need to catch up with these already outdated airplanes.
But I suppose, just briefly, it is a good sign that I guess if Serbia chooses more of a close connection with France and Europe rather than Russian weapons or even Chinese weapons, this is surely good to change that interoperability, to change that dynamic, surely.
You're absolutely right. The point is, that between the meeting and the practical implementation, there will be a long way. And if we look at the larger picture of the nature of relations between Serbia and the European Union, it becomes more and more apparent that, it is encouraging to see that President Vučić is meeting President Macron, and there is this kind of interaction taking place, because this is what the European Union expects, and surely this will give some credit to the Serbian perspective for membership. But in practical terms, there is a vast homework that needs to be made by Serbia in order to move forward with the membership perspective. And in that sense, here the enthusiasm, I would say, is a little bit slower.
Well, that's actually, I was going to make that point that because Serbia used to, maybe still, was getting Soviet-designed aircraft like MiG-29 jets, Mi-35 helicopters. So they're pretty much, dependent on their aircrafts. And now this is a bow towards Europe, Macron. However, Serbia always wanted to be a NATO member. They're actually they're NATO's Partnership for Peace program. They're part of that program right now. However, is this spat with Kosovo right now, which is the ongoing spat? Sometimes it's calmer, sometimes it's more turbulent. But is Serbia on its way to NATO, do you believe?
Well, first and foremost, let's be absolutely clear. There is absolutely no perspective, at least at this point, for Serbian membership in NATO. And this is not because of NATO, but it is because of the Serbian attitude and the still very strong post-1999 NATO airstrikes on Serbia and their implications for the, I would say, historical memory, the newest historical memory of the Serbian state and population. As it concerns the question of Kosovo, you're absolutely correct. There is this demand and absolute requirement for the improvement of these relations in order to think about the conclusion of the negotiations with the European Union. However, although we see some small steps, it is a very difficult game played both by Belgrade and Pristina, one step ahead, sometimes two backwards, and then one step ahead again, and then two steps ahead, and then one backwards. So it's an extremely dynamic perspective, but again, here, we also don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. What we see rather is a continuous a mixture of tensions and friendly gestures, with a dominating role rather of tensions than friendly gestures. So in that sense, we have also this perspective that Serbia, I think that in particular in the context of President Vučić and his foreign policy, is rather pursuing something different, which is to keep at an equal distance the European Union and its other economic and political partners, Russia, China, the Persian Gulf countries, and this is important for us because it kind of shows an attempt to balance instead of openly siding with the EU. This is best seen in its very specific attitude towards Russia in the context of European sanctions, something that was actually expected from the EU but never fulfilled by President Vučić.
Let's also stay with the region. Let's widen the scope a bit. We also have over now in Brussels the meeting of the chairman of the presidency of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Mr. Bečirović, who met the NATO Secretary General. Now, with Bosnia-Herzegovina, I'd say that is a success case for NATO peacekeeping. That is something that can be argued here. But nevertheless, we have these two very dynamic situations here now with the Secretary General meeting with the head of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Now, Bosnia-Herzegovina in itself already a very complicated entity, very much also made more so by Mr. Vučić's close associate in Republika Srpska, Mr. Dodik, who has a very, very different view of what he wants, and I think a very aggressive policy of what he wants for Republika Srpska. How much of a danger is, let's say, that in this whole dynamic? I mean, we know that Bosnia-Herzegovina has now begun the process of EU accession in a very slow but very symbolic way. How much of a thorn in the side of this process, and a dangerous thorn, is Mr. Dodik and is Republika Srpska?
Indeed, Bosnia in itself is another Gordian knot, and it's actually quite telling. The meeting that you have mentioned is extremely important in the context of the current tensions between the two constitutive entities, between Bosnian Federation and Republika Srpska, because on one hand there is a growing, let's say, symbolism of various separatist intentions within Republika Srpska. There is a lot of referencing to Russia, to support, to perspective of independence. And this is something that is indeed quite concerning. The NATO forces were the ones that brought the peace and the current shape of the Bosnian state. But what is extremely important to know is that actually later on this responsibility was transferred to the European Union in a sense. And currently there is a lot of concern whether there is no need for a further increase of the NATO military presence in Bosnia in order to make sure that these political ambitions of Serbian leaders will be appropriately responded, so that such perspectives of destabilization will not occur in Bosnia in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I mean, it is worrying, and I think we want to just share some images with you and our viewers here, because Mr. Dodik has been actually in the presence of Mr. Vladimir Putin actually 4 times since Ukraine has been invaded. I want to just show a brief tweet, or X, however you prefer to call it, of Mr. Putin giving a medal to, there we see it now, it is Mr. Putin there giving a medal, highest distinction. I think it was the Nevsky Award that's in Moscow there not so long ago, I believe just a couple months back, giving this to Mr. Dodik, who by in turn recently, I think in the last few days, has in turn given Mr. Orban a medal. So Mr. Dodik receiving Mr. Orban in Banja Luka. So we have a sort of an indirect medal giving here by these 3 gentlemen. Just briefly on that, Spasimir, what do you make of also Mr. Orban's presence here, especially in Republika Srpska?
Yeah, well, both for Putin and for Orban, Bosnia is one of the probably last and extremely precious spots of potential impact and destabilization. Dodik has turned into one of the closest aides of Putin, both in symbolical terms, as you showed and you mentioned, but also we need to be aware that there is a rising nationalist tide. Twitter today was also flooded with examples of Dodik, with Emir Kusturica and other famous representatives of Serbia singing Serbian nationalist songs from the interwar period that kind of builds up to this spirit of unfairness. And I think this is probably an important point that needs to be made. We need to be aware that for Serbs in particular, the outcome of the dissolution of Yugoslavia is considered to be an extremely unfair and painful moment of defeat in their history. And there is a silent notion of expectation that within this growing tension between the East and the West, there might be such set of circumstances, such constellation that can allow for certain revision of this unfavorable situation for Serbia. And this is what should be actually the essence of our concerns, because this is where the political rhetoric faces the silent expectations and demands. And this is what is not necessarily in accordance with the European perspective on the Balkans.
Now also Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said today, and he continues the quote, "And we commend Bosnia and Herzegovina for your recent progress on the path towards membership in the European Union, but we remain deeply concerned by continued separatist policies and divisive rhetoric." Now, is this a ticking bomb inside Bosnia and Herzegovina, or they will overcome this?
Indeed, you're absolutely right. Bosnia is, in a sense, a ticking bomb. Now, several years ago, when it was actually 25 years after the Dayton Agreement, Bill Clinton said that what was being created at that time was a framework that aimed to end the hostilities, but it needs to be further improved to make this country a functional democracy. And unfortunately, there is no enthusiasm on neither of the sides in Bosnia. And actually, we see a very dire situation where actually the ethnic vote is much more important than the political affiliations of ordinary people. And this is a case like no other for both the European Union and NATO. Mm-hmm. And in that respect, there is this silent hope that we will use the EU in order to resolve the conflict, the difficulties of Bosnia.
I mean, I smiled when you said a case like no other, because you're right. I mean, when you look at the history of it, the policy is just, very difficult.
It's difficult, and also I think the European Union knows that it needs a renewed focus on the Western Balkans. Look, we'll have to conclude today. Thank you so much, Spasimir Domaradzki. Thanks for your insights.